Hello, John. How are you today?
Doing great, Katya. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to be on your podcast.
I'm very excited as well. So, today's guest knows exactly what can go wrong when culture is overlooked in global workplaces. And years ago, while teaching English in Japan, John watched a student disappear after what seemed like a simple miscommunication. He thought it was about the language, but it wasn't. It was about culture. That's a little bit of his story. He's a very professional and intelligent person, and that's my honor today to have him as a guest. And he's the founder of Hiku Coaching. I hope that I pronounced this correctly. And Hiku means in Japan, a leap forward, where he helps Canadian companies and international professionals bridge cultural gaps before they become deal breakers. So I'm very, very excited to have our guest today, John McGraw. So, John, can you please tell a little bit about yourself? Why did you decide to do what you do right now?
I'm happy to, Katya. So I introduced myself as empowering businesses and international talents to leap across culture gaps so they can work and thrive together. And it's been a bit of a journey to get here. As you alluded to earlier in the introduction, my previous career was as an ESL, language as a second language instructor, which I was involved in for 15 years, several years in Japan, and I continued that in Canada as well. And it was through experiences that you mentioned early on, which we can get into a little bit later, that led me to realize that, of course, language skills are valuable, but that's only one part of the puzzle when you are adapting to a new environment. There are all sorts of unspoken rules that often many of the natives in the particular country or environment might not be able to explain fully themselves. And I only became aware of those rules in the Canadian context by being outside of Canada,
Mhm.
living in Japan for several years. Prior to that, as I like to say, if you had asked me about what Canadian culture was, I would have said Tim Hortons and hockey. But as we know, there's a lot more to it than that in terms of how we communicate with each other, both inside and outside of the workplace, the way we build relationships. And it, they're all, of course, around the world, it's all based around respect, but the way that we demonstrate respect and the way we perceive respect can be a little bit different. And it's those gaps which can lead to some challenges. But once we identify the different ways of showing respect, then we have a wonderful skill set that we can use and we can become bridges across different cultures to help businesses to thrive and also our own personal lives to be more fulfilling as well. So that's what's inspired me to do what I'm.
You said, and I know we talked about this before, that you were an ESL instructor for 15 years. That's quite a long time. And what was the pivotal point in your life, in your career, that you decided, okay, because being a teacher is something that I personally think is a vocation, right? So what helped you or what moved you going from ESL teacher transition into the to what you do right now, right? So what was the pivotal point? If you remember anything like that, or maybe there was no point. It was just you woke up one day and you decided this is what I want to do. Can you just explain that? Because I know as a teacher myself, something big has to happen that I move from something else. You know what I mean? Just like cut off completely this career and start something completely new that I have never done before. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. If I had to narrow it down to one point, I would say part that really got me going along that was a result of the pandemic and being laid off from my teaching job at that point.
Hmm.
And prior to that, I had a sense that I wanted to do something a bit different, approaching this in a different manner. In my career, I had been working largely with international students, some of them looking to transition into colleges here, others simply here for a few months, 6 months to work on their English and return back to their home countries or go on to other opportunities. Now, my wife is an immigrant. She's from Argentina, and she had transitioned into working from here from Japan. Just we had met in Japan, we had come here. And through her work, she's an HR professional, but she also does volunteer work. She's done quite a bit of work mentoring. So through her, I got a lot of exposure to other professionals, international professionals looking to adapt.
Mhm.
And when they would hear that I was an English teacher, they would say, "Oh, okay, well, can you help me with my accent?" And of course, accent work is valuable and important, especially you know this more than anyone. But I would say that when I would speak to these particular people, I did not see there being a challenge in understanding their accent and others as well. Although they seemed to think that there was some challenge there. And so it got me to thinking, well, perhaps there's something about that it's not necessarily a linguistic thing. I don't see any linguistic challenges the person's having. I don't see the accent in their particular case as being a challenge for them of being understood or being taken seriously. So it got me thinking more about my own experiences in Japan. In terms of Japan, this is a culture where harmony is valued, direct communication is valued, and a collectivist approach is valued. Some of those things were challenging for me to understand how to relate to people, how to build relationships. And I thought in some of these cases, that might be what's happening for some of these people. In other words, it might not be their accent, it might be how directly they're communicating. It might be something about building relationships, some other factor, because there's a lot of information about language. We have tests to measure it. There's not so much about that when it comes to these cultural differences, and yet they can have a huge impact on how we relate to each other. And because this was something that, well, getting back to mentioning the pandemic where I was laid off and I had time to think about what I wanted to do, I realized this is something I really want to explore more. I think that there's something that is missing in helping people prepare, whether it is international talent coming to Canada to work and become Canadian citizens and thrive here, or others going to other seas or working in a multicultural environment, business owners who want to hire the international talent and being able to work effectively with build good relations and open opportunities for them. So that's what led me to developing Hiku Coaching, which I know is tricky because it's very often to think haiku, but
Heck, yeah.
yes, he as in he, she, he.
He
I'm hoping it becomes well known enough, like Nike, everyone knows when they see it knows how to pronounce it. So in any case, that's what led me to going into this direction to develop cross-cultural and intercultural communication and awareness to help everyone, not just one group, but everyone to develop that awareness so that we all work more effectively together and relate to you.
It's interesting that you mentioned pandemic, right? So it was a difficult time for a lot of people, but that was also the time where a lot of people reevaluated their life, their meaning, what they do. So that was for you, I would say, blessing in disguise because you came up to something that I have to say thanks to pandemic that happened because otherwise you would just keep doing what you were doing. And in this case, it helped you to think what I can do right now, right? So maybe that was the time for you to find the meaning, find the purpose, right? So that's beautiful how life evolves and we never know, right? So just go with the flow and trust that everything happens for a good reason. I love that. And I wrote down the word communication. I loved what you said. Building relationships, right? Because when we think of any language, a lot of times people think that it's just the vowels, the words, but you said something very meaningful, building relationships. And it's not just the technical part, the language itself, the word sentences, but it's what we put into the sentences, our attitude, even nonverbal communication, little things written between the lines, being more assertive or being more reserve, right? So all of these different things, and you worked in Japan, you know this as well, that, for example, a business card, you need to hand with your both hands, right? You cannot just do it with one hand. That means disrespect. And little things like that, I wish I knew when I came to Canada because as a Russian speaking person in Russia, it's very common to be straightforward and just to say exactly what I think, right? And in Canada, I have a Canadian husband. It doesn't work this way. So, and that was a mystery for me for a long time that people didn't say exactly, let's say, when you invite someone to a birthday party, right? Let's say my son had a birthday party and I invited several kids, and I definitely texted that parents had to text me back. And I never had a text that said, no, we can't come, sorry. It was never like that. It was something that was put so nicely together that I didn't get offended at all. It was something that, for example, "Oh, thank you for your invitation. That is so nice and kind of you. Unfortunately, we have different, arrangements and we cannot come, but we wish you a wonderful birthday party." You know what I mean? So that for me alone was something that ha I don't even feel bad, right? Because sometimes when you get a no, that's something that can hurt you, but in this case, this no is a different thing. However, on the other hand, that can be very how would I put this? Um Very confusing when you go, you have a job interview and then you get a text or an email, right? So something that says, you are a very good candidate for this position, but da 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 da, right? And they explained it nicely as well. But at the same time, you feel like I didn't get the job. And again, you didn't feel you still feel rejected, but it is not painful. You know what I mean? So these little things that I actually love about the Canadian culture. It's always it's different for me. Sometimes I just like, well, just tell me what you want, right? So just tell me right away. But on the other hand, just like, thank you for not putting it in a way that actually hurt me. You tried your best to make it, look and sound nice. I like that. So speaking of that, we will go back we'll talk about this. But speaking of that, we talk about the Russian speaking community, and everybody that speaks Russian can be Ukrainians, guys from Belarus, Kazakhstan, everywhere that people speak Russian as well as their first language in their countries. And there are a lot of countries like that. So all of these guys that come to Canada or the US, it's pretty much the same thing. So why do you think they are perceived as cold, aggressive? This just like quote unquote, that's exactly what people say, or not collaborating, right? So when they just trying to people perceive that they're aloof and they don't want to communicate. First of all, let's put it into two different ways. What are the what are the facial expressions that help you realize that we are like that? And second, what is, not just the physical expression, what are the actions that speak louder that you can definitely guess this person, not based on the accent, but based on the cultural differences?
I appreciate you breaking it down into two parts. So I'll first of all cover the overall ideas behind it and then answer those parts in order, facial expressions. And as you said, the other parts beyond the physical side. So as we mentioned earlier, I think it comes down to a misalignment or miscommunication of what is respectful, because I think all of those are come from a sign of respect. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it with Russian speakers, the idea of showing respect is being clear and being direct, how you're feeling, exactly how you're feeling. And also the effect of being genuine, honest in the sense. So as I understand it, when we're getting into facial expressions, such as smiling, in Russian speaking culture, generally you smile when you are genuinely happy and you're with friends, perhaps. And there's a genuinely joyful moment, and it's reserved for that, but not necessarily for everyday interactions. And I think I've heard a Russian expression translated into English that if you meet someone who's smiling on the streets, they're either crazy or American. I don't know if that's correct.
I would say, yeah.
So there's that perception that perhaps it's smiling is disingenuous, right? If you're just doing that, talking with people in everyday, normal, neutral circumstances, why would you smile? In Canadian culture, I would say it's a sense of establishing rapport, establishing a relationship, that you are friendly, not threatening. Perhaps if a person is not smiling, that means that they're actually upset about something. And perhaps in extreme circumstances, they might be a threat, whether it's physical or maybe more of a social situation. So smiling is a way of establishing rapport and showing I'm okay. I'm not a threat. And this is actually quite important in workplace relationships because there's a question of competency and a question of, let's say, likability or empathy. And I would say in Canadian workplaces, especially in the beginning, establishing that empathy and likability is more important than establishing the competence. There was a study from LinkedIn a number of years ago regarding North America, talking with recruiters and career professionals that indicated 91% of the respondents, and these are career professionals, recruiters, and so forth, indicated that soft skills were just as, if not more important than hard skills when it came to hiring, and the soft skills being those building relationship skills. And of course, that's defined in the North American context, showing that you are friendly. So, at least in the beginning, it just shows how important it is. Because if you're competent, but you don't show those soft skills, and there's someone else who has much greater soft skills, shows themselves being friendly, and their hard skills are maybe not as good, likely the person who has the soft skills that's going to get hired at the beginning. Now, they do need to demonstrate competency later on, of course, but it just shows that dynamic, how we're much more comfortable with someone who is likable, shows empathy in the ways that we expect them in the Canadian context. So that shows the importance of smiling and why seeing someone who is perhaps not smiling could be seen, okay, well, what's wrong with them? What's going on here? What are they upset about? Did I do something wrong? Do they hate me? Yeah, and it just starts this spiral, thinking about, well, what's going on here, because they're just not used to that. It's a sign that something is wrong, as opposed to just, well, from Russian speakers' perspective, well, we're just at work. Why would I smile? It's just a situation. So it's a different perceptions of what's going on, different messages there. Getting into the nonverbal side, I think it again relates to those perceptions of what is the message, right? Is this person crazy because they're smiling, or it just means that they're not a threat? It also comes in terms of feedback, talking about how directly we communicate. You mentioned earlier these refusals that their children can come to the party, coming up with a less direct way, first of all, showing appreciation for being invited, and then saying, well, there's another thing. Unfortunately, I have something else that's taking priority. And it may be more honest, say, sorry, I can't come, I'm too busy. Now, from, again, a Russian speaker's perspective, that may be seen, okay, I'm direct, I'm not wasting time with needless words, I'm just saying what the fact is. And so I'm showing respect for that. But again, from a Canadian perspective, that can be seen as very, very hurtful. Well, why is this person being so brutal? Obviously, they must not like it. Well, I don't like them, like me. And that
Mhm.
can negatively affect a person's social relationships. And that can negatively affect their response in workplaces as well. Perhaps if feedback is given in a very brutal manner, by Canadian standards, by Russian standards, maybe just a very honest, straightforward manner, uh,
Yeah.
could be seen as an attack and potentially lead to an HR complaint.
Mhm.
So it's all about what's being perceived as respectful by not just the sender of the message, but also the receiver. And when there's a lack of understanding in what those messages mean, then that's where we get gap, a lot of lost opportunities for both sides, unfortunately.
Mhm. Wow. Well, first of all, I was pretty shocked that you said 91%, right? So, soft skills are more important than hard skills. That is a big number, I have to say. And the second thing, what I was thinking, because I worked for a corporate company as well, and we had different kinds of people in the company, right? So guys from uh, Canada, Canadians, Egypt, India, Pakistan, right? So Russian myself. There were a lot of different people, and it is interesting how you have to, as a leader, know all of these little things, right? Interesting that the HR department was consisted of Canadian employees, right? So because it is very important, I think, to have a person in HR. That's, I personally think so, to be from Canada, because these guys have to help and direct people what to say sometimes, right? So be less harsh and be more respectful here. But I think that it is very important for the HR department know all these little things about different cultures as well, right? So, and I personally think that you have to work with HR departments in every company. They have to know all of these little things, and maybe even to have meetings and explain that it doesn't mean that they disrespect you. It's just like the way we do things right here. So, I don't want to go off track because it's a very interesting conversation. And there's one thing that I wanted to ask about the smile. Do you have to smile every time you meet a person? Let's say the first day, first meeting of the day, and or you meet this person first time. Let's say this day. Do you have to smile all the time, or it doesn't have to be always friendly, or it's just good to smile? What do you think?
Well, there's a saying that the first impression is the best impression. So I would say when you are first meeting someone, it's critical to, because again, that's the impression that, hey, I'm not threatening. I'm pleased to meet you. So if you don't, that initial impression might be, oh, this person's cold. So like from a Canadian perspective. So I would
Mhm.
say definitely in the beginning, even though it might seem unnatural to you, it's good to get practicing that. And is it necessary to smile in every circumstance? I would say it's good to get used to, at least it doesn't necessarily have to be a full smile with, showing all of your teeth and this big broad grin,
Yeah.
like a Joker smile or something like that. But at least just to get used to curling your mouth up a little bit, even just showing a grin at least shows. that you are not threatening somebody, that you're appreciating them. And I would generally get used to that as your default, because oftentimes if they see that you're not smiling, there's an assumption that something is wrong. Now, perhaps if you get comfortable later on and you're having a bad day, then they might be, if you have a good enough relationship, they might understand that, okay, the person's having a bad day, and that may be acceptable once they've gotten to know you. But I would be very conscious of it in the beginning to show that, because again, that shows that approachability that's so very important in the Canadian workplace.
Yeah, and speaking of the Canadian workplace, there's a very big part of any company is being able to be a good team member, being able to be a good team player. And I just want to explain a little bit why it is not very common for Russian speaking people to be good team players. And you will help me to explain what it means to be a good team player in Canada. So I've noticed that, well, I see that in my kids and as a teacher myself, that a lot of things in Canada and the US are based on working in teams, right? So you go to school, you have different teams set up, and you every day something is happening, and it starts in pre-primary and primary. You work in teams. So Canadians and Americans are used to that. In Russia, in a lot of post-Soviet countries as well, it is not common at all. So we never had teams. Like when I went to school, we never had teams except for the gym class. That's it. So that is why a lot of times when people come to Canada, they are so uncomfortable and to be on a team, and it is very foreign and unfamiliar to be on a team. So can you please explain for a lot of our listeners that turned on their podcast today, explain to all of them and me, what does it mean to be a good team player in Canada, in any company?
First of all, thank you for sharing that with me, because it was something I wasn't aware of in post-Soviet countries. And that certainly highlights how much of a challenge it can be to come to Canada to adapt to that environment where teamwork is expected. So being a team player has a number of aspects to it. Of course, there's the concept of working on a shared task together, but it's also the relationships that you have, being able to communicate effectively in a Canadian context, being perhaps clear but kind, and also participating in casual conversations. So imagining perhaps the context of a sports team where camaraderie is built from achieving certain goals. That's the same thing that happens with teams as well, at least teams that function well. So there is a sense of a shared goal and being approachable. And this is the thing also with leaders in particular, especially in the Canadian context, it's even more so than in the American context. Leaders need to be approachable, meaning that they do not have all of the answers. And they will often ask their team members for their input. That's not a sign that the leader doesn't know what they're doing. That's a sign that the leader is actually open to the valuable experience that the team members can bring in. And
Wow.
that's seen as a positive. Yeah, it's actually seen as a positive, which is quite the opposite
It's
in
mind
other cultures
blowing.
I know.
It's mind blowing because in all of the Slavic cultures, it's the opposite. If you ask a team player or your employee a piece of advice, you're done. They can say, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be a leader if you don't know the answer. You have to show me what to do," right? And it's just like mind blowing what you just said. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
So much
Well,
permission.
exactly. And it comes down to the leader being the person who has the soft skills to help everyone to gel together, to work together more effectively, because the idea of a team is the sum of the whole is greater than the parts. So if the leader had all the answers, they probably wouldn't necessarily need the team. But with collective wisdom, you can bring everything together, and the leader helps to keep everyone working together, make sure that they're valued, and so forth. So that's why, again, if you want to become a leader, demonstrating those soft skills are more important than having all of this technical knowledge. Because, hey, team members could have the technical knowledge, but the leader is the person who has the know-how about people to get them to work together more effectively, come together as a team to reach those goals.
Wow. And in terms of participating in socials as well, is it necessary to go and have a couple of drinks after work? You know what I mean? Or having lunch together? In other words, do you have to push yourself to be likable and to be sociable, even if you don't want to go and have a couple of drinks after work? But if you see that the whole team goes, like 8 out of 10 people go to have a drink after work, is it good to go and join them? Or it's better just to stay and not participating in that at all? Would it be perceived as that you are not friendly, that you missed once, twice, 3 times, and then they will not invite you anymore? And then there's some sort of sense of awkwardness the next day. You know what I mean? So, because I can tell you from my perspective of a person that worked at a language school, we had tons of times that I saw the teachers went to have drinks after work Friday night for sure. Somewhere between, maybe even Wednesday night, they went as well. And I've seen that these people were bonded, right? They were connected. And because I was not a drinker, I'm not a drinker. And I don't feel comfortable going after work because it's not very common for my culture to go. Do I have to go and drink with them, or it's not necessary? What if this is one of the major things that the company appreciates, that just getting together after work and to be in a non-formal environment together? What do you think? I know it's a little bit of a tricky question right now.
I think that there's a real opportunity, as you mentioned, to build relationships in a different environment with the team. So missing an event once in a while because other commitments have come up, certainly that's fine. But if it becomes a regular aspect where you're not going to any events, that can have a negative impact on the relationships that you have, or you lose out on opportunities to bond, as you alluded to. Now, the aspect of drinking. One thing that I think has been changing, especially in Canadian workplaces and cities, is the idea of going out to drink actually meaning that you have to have alcohol. Because of the number of immigrants coming from cultures where simply drinking is not part of the culture, perhaps because of it's taboo in some ways, there's a greater understanding that not everyone has to drink. So it's still possible to go to events like these and not be expected to drink alcohol, that you can have a soft drink or whatever you're comfortable with. So as
What happens if you don't go? If you miss all the events, can you just explain that it's not a part of my culture, or you don't have to explain anything? What do you think? The reason I'm asking, because the drinking thing, the going for drinks is just one of the cases, right? Because they
yeah,
might be something. Let's go and play. What's the name? You push the in different games together, right? So let's go and play this game, or let's go and play this game, and the person just prefers to miss all of them. For all of the people that are listening right now, they might think it's just like, I just don't want to go, but they don't know that they actually miss out on a lot of opportunities to be with the
yes,
team, right? So,
yeah, it's if you miss all of these opportunities, if you opt out of them, then, as I said, it can have a negative impact on your relationships and your career as a result,
Mm.
because you may not be seen as a team player. You don't have to go. There's no formal expectation that you must go, but you'll lose out on those conversations. You may get some opportunities to connect with someone who's in a higher position that normally you don't have the opportunity to connect with as well, if it's a larger event, for example. And yeah, you'll probably be seen as a bit of an outsider if you avoid all these events. If the only time you show up is for work, people don't know you. And mentioned how approachability is so important. So if you don't
Mhm.
go to these events, you may be seen as less approachable. Now, if there's an aspect where it is a direct conflict with your culture in some ways or things, your values, it might be good to have a conversation about that if you're comfortable. Perhaps with the HR person, just explain, look, I do want to be part of the team, but this is in some way conflicting with my values. And perhaps that's something where they can start to adjust. So maybe they want to have events that are more inclusive. And certainly that's one thing would be getting back specifically to the drinking aspect, where there's perhaps less of an emphasis on that specifically in different workplaces, because they realize that may unintentionally exclude certain members of the team and try to have things that are more inclusive. So where there are opportunities, I would say it's a question. Is it just something outside of your comfort zone, or is it something that actually conflicts with your personal values? If it's something that conflicts with your personal values, then it's worth having a conversation. Or possibly, if it happens to be a negative environment, then perhaps considering maybe this is this working environment. But if it's just something that's maybe feels a little uncomfortable, maybe it's worth giving it a try, at least just to see. And you might find, depending on the environment, that it's actually maybe enjoyable, and it could open up opportunities for you as well.
Well, me personally, I loved it. We had different parties, right? But I also, as I mentioned before, that I was not a person that was ready to go have drinks twice a week, right? And on top of that, it's also something that I had to pay for, right? So, different things like that, that, you were trying to save money somewhere and that you're obligated to go twice a week with your coworkers because you have to, right? So you're building the connection, the rapport, the bond. But I want to say that it would be such a great idea when you get a job to have a brochure, and it has to be called somehow, mm, I don't know, etiquette of the company or something that it's good to follow, and maybe to have a paragraph or two paragraphs about socials, right? That people don't even know how important they are. And that will make a big difference. Why? Because for a lot of Russian speaking people, it's not very common, right? So why? It is, again, it's the cultural thing. If I go, I have to spend money. And a lot of people from post-Soviet countries, they like to save money. You know what I mean? They don't want to use their credit cards. They spend only what they have on their debit card, and that's why it's all comes down to budget. Again, cultural things like that. And a lot of people don't look at this way. They just live today, and it doesn't matter what's going to happen tomorrow. So this is, I think, it's also a cultural thing. And if there is some sort of an event like that, I think that it would be good to talk about the budget, right? So how much we have to spend on going. So that might be the case as well. Yes, and now it makes sense why you said that 90% of the recruiters mentioned that 90% were soft skills were seen as very valuable, because a big part of the Canadian culture, and I talk about a work environment, is to socialize, bond, get together after work. And this is where all the soft skills are thriving, right? Because you feel free and there's no work conversation. Even, sometimes they still talk about work, but again, it's different. And now it makes sense that it's not just work, 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 it's the balance. And if you are the person that sees that, okay, so it's not just about work all the time, it's about the balance as well. So in this case, that is why soft skills are extremely important in this case. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the accent, right? At the very beginning, you talked a little about the accent, and I know how important it is just to. And again, I never talk about the accent because I think it's very difficult. It's only if you're super dedicated to do that. But I just want to mention and talk about clear pronunciation, right? So intelligible pronunciation in this case. Some of my clients, they speak fluent English, and we talk about Russian speaking clients, students here as well. And they feel very self-conscious about how they sound and how they talk, giving a presentation or speaking up in a meeting, even asking a question. It's so hard because in their head, they have to be perfect. And this is also perceived as being professional and competent. So, what do you think about all of little things that our listeners today might be confused and they don't really know always that if I say anything right now, I will have a very thick accent. It's better for me not to say it. So, what would you say to people like that that are self conscious about their accent? Their English is good, they're fluent. Let's just take two case scenarios, and you're a teacher. That's great. So, we have on one hand people that are fluent in English, right? So they are highly competent, but their pronunciation is not that great, right? And on the other hand, we have people that everything is good, pronunciation is good. They're very professional, very competent, but they're very self conscious and they will never say anything unless they feel that everything they're going to say is going to be perfect. Do you think it's something cultural or it's something personal?
I would say it could be a bit of both because I've certainly met and known Canadians who've felt that way about perfection, perhaps not specifically about trying to do everything perfect. Sometimes I've been trapped in that mindset myself when it comes to communicating in Japanese or doing some other work, preparing for a workshop, for example. I do think that there may be some cultural influence as well. I can't say specifically to Russian speaking cultures, but I know that that was something quite common in Japanese culture, that sense of wanting to be perfect before saying anything. What I would say to that is if you don't speak at all, you lead losing on opportunities. If you're the person who's quiet and doesn't say anything, you might be perceived as not having anything of value to
Mhm.
contribute.
Wow.
Why isn't this person saying anything? Oh, they must not. This, I think, could be part of the reason. I'm sure you've been experienced personally with meetings in Canada. There are a lot of people who speak quite a bit. Sometimes maybe they don't even actually have anything really to say, but they're speaking up because they want to be visible, because visibility can be important. I'm not suggesting to be like that, where you're just talking and not having anything of value to contribute. When it comes to perceptions around accent, I think you mentioned this earlier, a lot of it is the story that's going on inside our heads. What will they say of me? And perceiving the worst case scenario or assuming what the worst case scenario would be. Oh, they'll think I don't understand what's going on here. And I'm not a clear communicator. I'll lose out on opportunities. I'll get laid off, like going the extreme worst case scenarios with these. But then you also have to think about, well, what will I lose out if I don't speak? I lose that visibility. I lose the opportunity to show that I have ideas that are valuable to share. I lose the opportunity to connect with others. And all of these are extremely important in the Canadian workplace. And perhaps in the case of people who are fluent speakers, but due to the influence of their accent, their communication may not be as clear to Canadians. The best way to get over that is to practice and communicate, have those conversations. feel free to clarify if you do. I think that there's a greater appreciation of different accents now, especially as more immigrants come into Canada, and there's a greater understanding. It doesn't make sense to discriminate based on accents with so many different people coming from different places. Just to continue with that, I would say that if others have commented that it is a challenge to understand what you're saying, then continue to work on that, of course, but don't wait until you have perfect pronunciation, because then you may never get there. As long as people understand you clearly, that's the most important thing. And you can always just check in, perhaps from trusted people in the workplace and elsewhere. You can say, hey, you can give me candid feedback about how I'm speaking. Please let me know. Please feel free to that. Because one thing is that generally speaking, Canadians want to avoid conflict. They're not likely to necessarily speak up if they have difficulty understanding. Unlike teachers, of course, will tell you this because they don't want to upset you in some way or potentially be seen as being racist or
Yeah.
discriminatory. They're less likely to comment. So if you can speak to people and say, hey, perhaps my pronunciation is not as clear, if there's anything that you don't understand or need to clarify, please be candid about it. If you open that up and let them know, I think that it'll show a little bit of vulnerability, which actually goes quite a long way. It's not too much vulnerability, but it's a little bit. And also it's showing that there's something you want to work on and improve, which is also very appreciated in Canadian culture. And that can build a bit of rapport as well. So you can
Yeah.
actually use it as an opportunity. Exactly.
So it all comes
And
down to communication, right? Just being able to convey the message. If you're not comfortable, say that, but say it in a professional way because there's a boundary too. So you don't have to cross the border and just go to an HR and, tell all the problems you have in life. But little things like that that make you uncomfortable in this workplace, that can help a lot. And that, again, that can show people that you are approachable, that you are vulnerable. And it's safer to work with people like that than to work with people that are quiet, silent, never smile, and just try to stay away from the group, right? So in this case, you just have to choose, right? So what are you gonna do? What will work best for you for sure? And I always say, and I thank you so much for saying that it will never be perfect. And speaking of Japanese, I like this expression in Japanese, wabi sabi, right? So it's never perfect. And I like that as well. So that's what I actually like to say that to my students. Wabi sabi, it's never perfect. It's you have to think of this as a carrot that will be always dragged along and you will never get this, right? So think of this way. Know where you are right now. If that is a problem, communication and the language and pronunciation, you can work on that. If there's something psychological, you can work on that as well. If it's something cultural, you can work on that as well. There's a way. In every situation, there's a way. The thing is that don't stay there, don't blame yourself, and know that there is a way. Just find the path and go there. And you will improve your pronunciation on the go because you said something that struck me, that you said, if you're quiet, you have nothing valuable to say. And if you have nothing valuable to say, what are you doing here? Right? So that's the thought that I have right away. So even if maybe you have some mistakes in pronunciation and it's still intelligible, it's better to say it than to be quiet. Because if you say it, even in this case, it might be scary, but you say something, you know it's not correct, you can work with this. And that's very important to remember that it's never perfect. Just have courage and speak up. That's for sure. John, I want to ask you one more question about the habits. So if there was one thing that you can suggest and tell our listeners today, what is one small habit Russian speaking professionals could change today, this week, that would help them build trust and connection at work? Maybe one or two pieces of advice.
One thing I would say that's very simple to bring in is to start every day with a check-in with your colleagues. Simple like, hi, how's it going? With a
Mm.
bit of a smile. As much of a smile as you can manage. It still feels not too much of a stretch, but maybe a little bit of a stretch for it. Doing that just in the beginning, especially in the beginning, and continuing on will go a long way to help build those relationships, showing a little bit of curiosity. And no one's necessarily expecting they'll give you a long answer. It's just saying, oh, fine. How are you doing? But it's the simple way of just, hey, I'm ready to start. How are you doing? Checking in with you, checking in with me. I'm good. You're good. And that's a very simple thing to start off with, and to start every day. It's a Monday. Hey, how was your weekend?
Mm.
Right. And getting into that rhythm of doing perhaps a little bit of small talk will go a long way in helping to build those relationships that be critical in the workplace, what I would say.
And what is that's the question that people always ask me. Can you please explain what small talk is? So I would ask a Canadian, what does it mean to have a small talk? Does it have to be a whole story? Does it have to be two sentences? So can you explain a little bit about that small talk? And if we talk about this right now, do you have to initiate that first, or you have to ask from someone else to ask your questions?
Well, small talk is just talk about relatively unimportant subjects, which seems odd, maybe depending on your background. Why would we waste time talking about things that are unimportant? The purpose is to develop rapport and find common ground. Why is it that Canadians talk about weather all the time? Because it's very easy to start conversation about that with anyone. It's not a controversial subject. You're not going to get into an argument by expressing an opinion about the weather in some way. And it's something that you're commonly experiencing. So you're talking, hey, really hot today, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. Hey, this is something that we're shared together. And it's a very easy thing to start out with. That's the real purpose, is to establish that commonality in the beginning. So because in Canadian culture, there is a bit of a separation from work life and personal life, those opportunities to connect and socialize with people generally don't happen outside of a workplace environment, except for those events that are specifically mentioned in workplaces. We have work friends and we have our personal friends. It's a very common divide in Canadian culture. I'm not sure if this is common in Russian speaking cultures as well. And we don't tend to get into very deep conversations for the most part with a lot of our colleagues at work. But we still need to establish that rapport. So small talk is the way to do that, whether it's about the weather, whether it's about sports, what you did on the weekend, maybe some news events, local news. That's the real purpose of it, as opposed to just not necessarily deep interest in the subject itself, but it's like what it establishes. Now, your other question was about, sorry, you had to wait there.
Yeah, so if I recap, and if you know the person a little bit more, you can ask, "Hey, how was your daughter's birthday?" Right? So
Sure.
the bottom line is that you say hi and you ask a question that is related to something neutral, right? So whether it's weather or a sports game or someone's birthday party, or the person told you on last Friday what this person was going to do, and you ask this person about the weekend, and it's literally two, three sentences, and that's it. And it's a great icebreaker You show up as a friendly person that is approachable, that is here, that is friendly, and you can trust me, right? So I'm just like you can trust me, and I like you because I'm talking to you. So this builds and creates this friendly atmosphere where the environment is not tense, everybody's happy, and there's no conflict because you said Canadians don't like conflicts. Nobody does. But this is what helps to warm up the vibe. Let's put it that way.
Well put. Yes, absolutely. And that's the way to build trust in the Canadian workplace. So small talk is actually very important, even if the topics themselves are not. The
Mm.
purpose of it is very important for establishing relationships.
Because you said 91% is soft skills. And that
Exactly.
is one that shows a lot. So if you want to have warm relationship, you have to work on your soft skills as well, even if you don't want to. But this is part of the Canadian culture, and I think you'll get used to it. I think it's pretty cool. I always like to talk to people. I don't know. They're like, hey, how's it going? I can never just pass the person and say hi and then just, walk away. If we're, have good relationship with this person, I always ask, except that if it's my boss, I was just saying, hi, yeah, how are you? I'm waiting for the senior people ask me questions because I know that sometimes they're very busy when I worked for a company, for example. And I didn't ask the question because I knew that in 5 minutes this person has a meeting, so that's why in this case I didn't say anything. But yeah, so I would just want to ask one last question about the Russian speaking people. If someone is constantly being told that you're too direct, right? Or you're not a good team player, you have to think about that. What is a practical way to respond without getting offended? Let's put it that way.
Yes. And the most important part is to keep in mind that it's not a personal attack. If they're coming to you with that, there's a reason for it. There's might be a concern in some ways. So rather than perhaps the instinct is to get offended, and that's understandable, feel that way if you're not prepared for a comment like that. But to realize, okay, this is coming from an intention where we want to avoid assuming negative intent, right? Most of the time, if that feedback's being given to you, it's an opportunity. So I would first of all start off by saying, okay, well, thank you for bringing it to my attention. So always thanking, whenever you receive feedback, that's always a good thing. Thank you for the feedback
Mm.
because it shows that you are coachable and you are interested in what they're sharing. And then I would say, be clear but kind. Say, in my culture, being direct is considered a way of showing respect and phrasing it in a positive term and explaining this is that. However, I would like to learn more about working more effectively here or communicating more respectfully here in Canada. What are some things you could suggest, for example? So first of all, thanking them for the feedback, explaining yourself in a clear way, in a positive way, as opposed to say, well, it's always, I don't like it when talking like this because Canadians waste their time doing that, phrasing it as this is
Yeah.
how it is respectful in my culture. However, I do want to adapt. And what could you suggest? If you say I'm too direct, or what would be what would you an ideal a compliment, or what would you like to see? What do you see as respectful communication in this situation?
Well, that was very, very powerful. And I actually want to finish on that because you just gave the structure. And I love that as a teacher. I love that you just gave the structure. You have to thank, first of all, right? So if you hear something, maybe a negative comment or someone said you're too direct, you have to, I want you to consider that. And then out of the blue, you just say, well, thank you for saying that, right? Because that is so unexpected. People never say something positive when someone says, hey, you're like this. So, but I love that. So you say, thank you for saying that. Very, very respectful. And then you explain in a positive way why you act like that, right? And then, which is amazing and will help building this trust and relationship when you ask and say, "What do you suggest? How do you see that? What should I do? What do you think?" Right? And that is so powerful because in this case, there is no tension and two people act like adults, right? So not just like one is an adult and one is a child that gets offended. So there is communication happening, and that is so important. So important. John, I want to thank you so much. That was such a powerful conversation because we went into some details and I was going there and I was asking you questions because uh, I wanted to go and have a real life scenario and you nailed it. That was so good. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a great pleasure, and I love the opportunity to learn more about Russian speaking culture from yourself as well with some of the examples. And yeah, this was a great opportunity, and I appreciate having me on here. And hopefully, if any of the viewers out here have more interest, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. You can look for hiakucoaching.com as well. Connect with me. And I'm also active on YouTube and Instagram. So if you have any questions,
That's the next question. How can they find you? Because well, I'll just link and I put the links to your LinkedIn. And what is the next best way to reach you? Is it YouTube? Is it your Instagram? Or is it your website? So what's the better way?
probably the website through emails is common there. So you can share my email as well, John.McGraw at hiakucoaching.com. LinkedIn is the easiest way, but also yeah, Instagram is another way for me as well, but I don't check it as often. Those other two don't work for you as well.
If anybody has questions or wants some coaching on why did they say that or what am I doing wrong here, you can definitely help our listeners for sure. In terms of me, you can ask me anytime, any question. If you have questions about a Russian way of thinking and why people act like that, you can definitely drop me a text. I'll be happy to help.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to do that
Thank you
anytime I
so
have